not justify the use of force and would be contrary to the Charter.
Mr. Gaitskell, you've often talked about going to the United Nations. Now, what specifically would you propose the United Nations do?
Well, may I just say one thing first of all, Mr. Newman? I have said, first of all, we must act in accordance with the Charter. And the Charter only allows you to use force in three eventualities. First, in self-defense or collective defense until the Security Council tells you not to. That's important, and it's an obviously necessary part of the Charter. Secondly, if the Security Council decides to recommend force, that may be unlikely because of the veto rule. Or thirdly, if 2/3 of the Assembly so recommend. I want to emphasize that, because that is a principle that we believe in, quite apart from our belief that the matter should go to the United Nations. Now you ask me, why do I think, or what should they do?
What would you ask the UN to do?
Yes, I will tell you what I would ask. I don't believe we can regard the United Nations as a kind of tribunal which we refer the matter to and we say, now look, you settle it. For the reason that perhaps we all know that there is this veto rule in the Security Council, and you might not get a 2/3 majority for anything. You can send a legal issue to the Hague Court, to the the International Court. And personally, I think it would be worthwhile and would be a good thing to send the legal aspects of this case to the Hague Court. But let us be clear about this. If you go to the United Nations, you go there really because it gives an opportunity to negotiate a settlement. And it gives you an opportunity to negotiate in what I would regard as much more satisfactory and favourable conditions.
But you're Prime Minister now. What would you be doing about Suez, Mr. Gaitskell?
I would have referred by now, long since, the whole dispute to the Security Council.
With what expectation? With what expectation?
With the expectation that they would probably appoint either the General Secretary or maybe a group of powers who weren't particularly intimately concerned, maybe one or two, to see whether they could bring the parties together.
And how long do you think this might take?
Well, it might take a little time, but I don't think that's a bad thing.
What do you mean by a little time?
Well, I don't know. It may take a matter of weeks at any rate.
I'm very interested in your talk about negotiating with Colonel Nasser, because when I was in Egypt not very long ago, it seemed to me that much of the Western world was regarded as a Zionist conspiracy, with you as one of the chief conspirators. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, is it really possible to negotiate with people who believe that sort of thing?
I'm perfectly certain that you've got to try. After all, what is the alternative to this? You see, none of you have discussed that at all.
But can we go back to history?
No, not until I finish what I was going to say. The alternative to this is, after all, the use of force, and it is going to war. Let's mince words about it. And are you really prepared to do that? You see, the mistake the British government have made is that they, on the one hand, have given the impression, at any rate, in the way that I've pointed out, that they intended to use force. And that they were thinking, or at any rate, of the possibility of war all the time. Now, I think myself, we should from the start have recognized that however wrong Nasser was, this was not an issue which justified force. And having made that decision, what we should have done is to say, well, we must settle it in other ways. But how? Well, the first thing is you've got to win world opinion over to your side, particularly if you take it, as you should have done, to the United Nations. And that means disavowing the use of force except in self-defense. And I must point out that that is exactly what we asked the government to do as long ago as August the 13th, as well as, of course, referring it to the United Nations. I do apologize.
Well, I'm sorry, I was going to ask you, whether not in general, but in particular, whether you thought that the London conference was a wrong move.
No. I think it was a sensible.
And you think that the 18-power solution plan was a good plan?
Yes, I think it was quite a good plan.
Well, don't you think it is a better plan than we were ever likely to get from the United Nations?
I haven't opposed the London conference. I didn't oppose that at the time. What I did suggest on August the 13th, and I don't claim to have suggested it earlier, you must remember on August the 2nd the conference hadn't even been decided on. But I did say on August the 13th, and the party said, that they should, after that conference, take it to UNO. Now, I think it would have been better to have done that, because you would have got it in the atmosphere of the United Nations before Nasser had committed himself against it. And I think the prestige of the United Nations would have made him hesitate before he did that.
Where do you think we go from here? I mean, do you feel that the Canal Users Association is going to produce any useful results at all or not?
I think the Canal Users Association has only one function or value, and that is that there is a case, as I said in the House, for the users of the canal forming themselves together for negotiation purposes. What I think should now be done, it's not, or wasn't at any rate when I came here this evening entirely clear what had happened at this last conference, but what I think should now be done, I would refer the matter to the Security Council without any further delay. It's been held up too long, and I think that that's the first step to be taken from the point of view of world opinion.
What did the Security Council do about the Israeli shipping hold-up in 1951?
They passed a resolution against it which the powers refused or didn't do anything to enforce.
And Egypt refused to carry out.
Egypt took no notice of it. Perfectly true. But I don't think that's the reason.
Might that not recur?
It might recur. It might recur. But if I may, I'll come to that in a moment. What I would do, Mr. Williams asked me this, I would refer it to the Security Council, and I would try and negotiate with NASA what I call a halfway house.
Through the Users Association, would you negotiate?
I don't think it matters, frankly. If the Users Association, I'd say this, had been put across from the start as simply a negotiating body, yes. But as you know very well, and I don't want to overdo this, but the Prime Minister put it across in the House of Commons in a way which most of us thought was highly provocative. And in the sense that it implied that they were going to push their ships through the canal, and if they didn't, they reserved the right to use force. I don't want to go over all that again. I want to get back, if I may,